Welcome to the August 31st, 2010 meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have a roll call, please?
Authority members: Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Parazian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Quintero.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the August 31st, 2010 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, August 26, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
What's next?
Next is oral communications. There are no minutes for approval at this meeting.
Okay.
Under oral communication, discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the Housing Authority may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the matter may be referred to staff through the Executive Director for investigation and report.
All right, I have one card, Herbert Milano.
Housing Authority Chair Quintero, members of the Housing Authority and city staff. My name is Herbert Milano. I have a couple of issues that I want to bring up to the Housing Authority. The first one is one that is fairly broad, but it concerns a practice that the city has maintained for a fairly long time, which is that when the minutes are being compiled for this authority or the redevelopment agency or any other agency or meeting, formal meeting, only the name of the speaker appears and not the topic. Now, if you don't address the topic in front of the public and you don't record the issue that we're bringing forward to you, then, it seems to me that you're telling the public that our voice and our opinions don't really matter. They don't even matter sufficiently to be able to be recorded. So let's assume for a moment that I bring up an issue today having to do with a significant quality of life issue. The Housing Authority tries to provide affordable housing, and affordability of housing is critical for a large proportion of the population in Glendale. But another affordability index is the ability of people to be able to pay and afford their utilities, water and electricity. And from your own reports that you received in the past, there's a recognition that tens of thousands of families are having difficulty paying their water bill and their electric bill. And it is my opinion that just as this Housing Authority looks towards the affordability of housing, that you should also be looking towards the other elements of affordability. Because if individuals who are renting, who are not participating in many of these subsidized housing programs that the city carries, if they're not able to pay their rent, they have to leave, uproot their children from their schools, and that, to me, is a significant quality of life detriment to these people. And I think that the affordability issue with regard to water and electricity is pertinent for discussion for the Housing Authority because of the issue of be able to afford to be able to for families to live in Glendale. So it is my hope that in the future we have two things happen, that you record at least a summary of the topics that I bring up or that other individuals bring up, and that you take up the issue of the affordability with regard to the residents and their ability to be able to pay for water and electricity. Thank you very much.
Okay, next, please.
On the business agenda at 6A is Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding discussion of the development of an affordable housing project for authority-owned property located at 5th Street and Sonora Avenue. At 6A1 is a motion providing direction to staff.
Starbird.
Yes, I'll go to Phil Lanza, Fame Director. Phil?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Housing Authority, in August of 2008, the Authority purchased approximately 1.5-acre parcel near the intersection of 5th and Sonora. It was purchased, and we'll bring you a slide here to give you a reference. It was purchased for the advancement of affordable housing. There's the property here. There's about 45 feet frontage on Sonora, which is down at the bottom, and about 200 feet of frontage on 5th, which is that in the upper left-hand parcel. It's zoned R2250, and there are currently 4 one-bed bungalows on the property. Staff has been working with the Planning Department to get a general idea of the level of development and different types of development that we could put on this site at some point in the future. In addition, we've been working generally with our financial advisor, TR West Advisors, and Tim Mulren, who's here, to get an idea of what a project that the different scenarios that we came up with, what that might mean in terms of assistance from the Housing Authority if we were to build a property. We think that ranges anywhere between about $4.5 million to maybe $8.5 million. I will note that there's a mathematical error in your staff report under the scenarios 3 and 4. But in general, what we were trying to do is give you a magnitude of assistance, and that still holds true. The report from the analyst in the back, the last exhibit, is correct. We're here today because the Housing Authority should have the resources within the next 12 to 15 months to assist at the magnitude that we've identified. So we're here before you today to ask several questions in direction. First, do you want us to pursue development of this site now at this time? We could, or we could put it off for another time until we finish some of the projects that we have in the queue. If you do want to develop it now, would you like us to issue an RFP? Back in December of 2009, the Housing Authority authorized the issuance of a statement of interest. We submitted that out to the broad development community and got responses from about 20 different developers that said they were interested in working with the Housing Authority to build affordable housing. 6 had specifically identified this site. Most recently, last week, as a matter of fact, the Housing Authority authorized us to amend that statement to include some preference for veterans housing. So we're set to go back out, or if you want us to develop an RFP, we would put that in the RFP. So again, we're here for some direction. Before I list those, I just wanted to go through some of the scenarios that we came up with the Planning Department. 80 units of senior housing. I should say with the zoning, the R2250, the maximum number of units you could put on the site is 35. However, with SB 1818 density bonuses, we could get higher, up to 80 units, and you could even go beyond that. In working with the planning staff, we've kind of come up with these maximums of 80 units for very low and low senior housing. You could do 53 units of very low and low income seniors. You could do 53 units of very low and low income family, or 35. And so one of the things we're going to ask you is, what level of density would you like to see on the property? All of those would require about one level of subterranean parking. In terms of the financial assistance required, again, it ranges between $4.5 million to $8.5 million, with the 80-unit senior project being the most expensive to us. Staff is specifically looking for direction. Again, if you would like us to issue an RFP, if so, what preference of household would you like to see? Senior, family, some mix of the two? One of the things we'll ask you is your appetite for veterans housing, how much you would like, and in what ratios. Preference of low, medium, or high density would be another question. Should this be a for sale or for rent product? Right now, for sale projects are difficult to finance. However, we hope to see that change at some point in the future. But right now, rental is a little bit easier to get tax credits on and finance. I should also say, in terms of tax credits, that market is improving as well. So the kind of the financial parameters that we've given you here, those may improve. They're based on about 72 cents on the dollar for a tax credit. We know in a recent round that people are getting up to 90 cents, 92 cents. So that may improve a little bit, but at least you have a magnitude. So with that, staff is here. Our consultant is here if you have any questions. I will add that two things. With the 20 developers that did come to speak to us, one of them has a specific proposal. There are no economics attached to it, but they do have a specific proposal for you, and I think they're one of the speakers today. I would also tell you that another developer has gained some control over adjacent properties in I would say that another developer has taken control of this site right here, which would allow the project to be expanded with more housing, more open space, other things. So with that concludes our presentation, and we look for your direction on those issues. Whether you want us to move forward to develop it, RFP, the density, household type, and then veterans preference.
Okay, Mr. Starburn.
Well, Bill, I can. To be clear, your staff's conclusion or recommendation would be that under any scenario that we'd request proposals. You can hear from anybody, and you may even want to request proposals with the different density options out there. But just to be clear, our view is in looking at the at least two and probably more developers that have an interest in the site, we think our best interests are served by requesting proposals from those who may have an interest to get a sense of both how they design it, utilize it, and what the economics would be behind their proposals.
Correct.
Ms. Friedman.
Bill, what is the density, what is the zoning of the adjacent properties? Can you show us on your map, as you move up, how the zoning changes and where?
I'm willing to bet that these are all R2250. I believe, and I don't know exactly the density, the zoning, but I know as you move up in here, you move into single family. These, I believe, adjacent to on either side are multifamily, at least the existing, and then down here is commercial. I don't know the zoning.
I see Mr. Hagani. Do you know offhand where the zoning starts to change to R1R and? Okay, at some point, I think we need to see this in terms of evaluating the density, how quickly it changes, and whether there's a proper buffer between the R1R and the higher density, and whether this was ever one of those areas that we had considered doing the kind of transitional zoning to sort of step down the density. Okay? So that's information I'd like to see the next time.
And my recollection is that across the street and to the west are absolute multifamily housing units and quite dense, at least 3 stories
Over here.
on Sonora. Are there any other questions for the staff? Mr. Najarian.
But in any event, SB 1818 controls the issue of the zone, of the density.
In that it would allow you to increase and go beyond the zoning.
I mean, the idea is that if I don't misstate, there's a concern that there may be less dense zoning just north of there, and that in order to make a smoother transition, that we not max out the total number of units, in other words, to create more of a step down. We can't do that with SB 1818.
Well, if I can, Mr. Mayor, let's clarify. You're the property owner in this
Yes.
case. So you can make a decision to do something less than the zoning would permit, or frankly, less than you could accomplish under SB 1818 because you own the property.
Regardless of any
Regardless, again, if you-
federal funds or HUD funds or anything else that comes in.
I think you can. My understanding is you can make a decision about the density and appropriateness of a project because you're the landowner. Any developer you choose would have to have a plan that suits your interests because you're the property owner.
We do have control.
And I would say that 35 units to the acre is the max. You could go to 40, but say, beyond 40, then we get too much. You could put that number wherever you want.
And by the way, I'm not trying to imply that any of these proposals are too dense or not dense enough, I just don't know. So when it comes back, I'm just saying that I think we should have the information of what's the surrounding zoning is and what's existing there, and any other projects that we know that are coming online.
I'll just say, while you're taking oral communications, I'll review the report. We may have a description, and I'll check with staff to see if we can get that answer for you, or we'll bring it back.
Okay, I have a number of cards. Anyone else want to submit a card? Okay, I'll close the card submittal period. Okay, we'll start with Herbert Milano, followed by Efren Olivares.
Good afternoon. Housing Authority Chair Quintero, members of the Housing Authority, and city staff. I'm come before you with regard to this item on the agenda because I would like to learn a few things as to how these decisions are made. I know that during the years that you all have been on this dais making decisions about low-income and affordable housing and the actual development of lands that you've acquired in the past, whenever I looked at these particular costs per unit, they always seem to be well above and beyond what the market prices are. I look here, for example, cost per unit for seniors at $391,000, and for a family unit, $517,000. Now, I understand that sometimes when you are allocating these units to, let's say, individuals who may be invalid or are not ambulatory, the design may include some type of accommodation for those individuals. But what about for those who are, should we say, are not necessarily with a handicap? I was wondering, what would be the cost per square foot? It's a number that, those people who are generally in real estate and in construction generally used as the guide. What is the cost per square foot? And today, you can purchase an apartment building at about $200, $220 a square foot, depending on the quality and the age of the unit, with the adequate parking according to the zoning. So my question is this. Is it part of the Housing Authority to recommend perhaps that you purchase units, or maybe in condominiums and so forth, that are already out there, and it reduces the amount of time that it takes to, let's say, move this program along? Why not just simply buy whatever is extant in the market, and you'll be buying it at a significantly lower cost without having to develop it? So the argument that I'm making is that possible? Is that within the framework to say, instead of having to pay for architects and development and all these other projects, why not, if 70% goes to individuals who are not, let's say, handicapped, why not just purchase them? And you will be purchasing them at a significant lower cost. The time to actually get them into effect would be a lot shorter, and you will be basically dealing with market prices as opposed to, these significantly, what I consider, bloated costs. Anyway, those are the questions that I have, and perhaps some of you can shed some light on that. Thank you very much.
Okay, next is Efren Olivares, followed by Ron Cohen.
Good afternoon, Chair Quintero and council members or Housing Authority members. I am here to speak on this item because I am one of the developers, and I have a team of developers that has looked at this site. We have worked on this property for well over 8 months. Timing was a little bit too close to, obviously, this decision-making today, but I wanted to bring some points in front of you and hopefully get you to consider negotiating with our team. Normally, I don't like to prepare statements, but this one was very technical, and so I'm going to, if you can bear with me, I'm going to read through this. As indicated in the staff report, there was a previous statement for requests for qualifications for opportunities of affordable housing in the city. This was back in December. As recent as last week, a week ago today, we submitted a complete package to the Housing Department for the property at 5th and Sonora. The proposal included schematic plans, a team profile, a financing structure, and a very aggressive schedule for completing the project. As far as I know, we're the only team that has shown a complete packet as opposed to just an interest to look at the property. The project itself, very quickly. We're proposing 53 to 60 units, well within the parameters that are in the staff report. We're suggesting a combination of senior and special needs with a reserve for subsidized veteran housing. How much of that, we don't know yet until we enter into some negotiations and hear the desires of the authority. The building itself will be 3 structures, all 3-story, built on grade, no subterranean parking. There will be a 4th structure, which will include an activity room, restrooms, health services area, exercise area, and storage. The parking will be on grade on the rear portion of the property that borders onto the commercial zone that is facing Glen Oaks Boulevard. This helps us to create a buffer between the residential and the commercial area. The architecture proposed will be I'm calling it a contemporary craftsman that will be more suited to that neighborhood. There will be a health services component on site. Our management agents, who will speak in a few moments, are proposing to have health services on site so that both seniors, veterans, and special needs will have direct services so that they're not necessarily going to the hospitals all the time on minor conditions. This proposal fits well within the scenarios and parameters of the staff report. The use of SB 1818 will be utilized in order to obtain density bonus and incentives. The development team. The development team is comprised of the following members. Each one will make a brief presentation following me. Amcal Housing will be the developer and the builder. They bring tax credit strength and experience to the project. United Cerebral Palsy, in partnership with ALA, will be the management team responsible for operations and day-to-day management. Architaller Inc. will be the planning consultant, architect, and construction manager. I will be the liaison to the city. The financial structure is primarily a tax credit structure, and Maurice Ramirez with AMCAL will touch on that when he comes up to speak. The schedule. We have provided a schedule that is aggressive and realistic. Our goal is to be in the ground September 2011. That's about a year from now, with a projected construction of 12 to 14 months. This schedule hinges on our ability to pursue negotiations with staff immediately. The staff report indicates that in the alternative, it will be 12 to 15 months to be able to begin a partnership with a developer before you start to negotiate. We have developed a project that fits within the staff report parameters. We have addressed the planning, financing, and schedule of the project. We would require a 4-month period to articulate the project to the authorities' needs and desires, and to prepare and execute a DDA. That's a development and disposition agreement, so that we could pursue the entitlements and move on to our March deadline for tax credits. This would mean that we could be in the ground a year from now in September. Our strong points. We already have the concept. We've already developed the concept, architecturally and financially. We will start construction in September 2011. Because our parking and the efficiency of the building, our level of subsidy will be less, somewhere around $5 million, than if you were building subterranean parking. Current construction costs are below the normal standard that we're used to, somewhere below, about 23% below the standard. The current CTAC process is competitive, but it is known today. The current director has publicly indicated that no major changes are planned for 2011. Just have one more minute. No one knows what 2012 will bring to the program. In summary, we're respectfully requesting that you review our package of last Tuesday and that you will allow us to take a little bit of time to negotiate with the city on this project. Ron Cohen, who was going to speak after me, had to leave. He's getting an award down at Dodger Stadium this afternoon. But we have the representatives of ALA and AMCAL who can discuss some of the other details of the project, and I'm here in case you have any questions.
Ron Cohen isn't going to speak? Ron Cohen isn't here?
No, he's not. He had to leave.
Mr. Freeman.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. This is just a point of information for this authority member. I am thoroughly confused at this point. I do see nothing on the business agenda about pitches to this authority from developers on a property, the disposition of which hasn't been discussed at all. In fact, the agendized item is a motion providing direction to staff about the issues that I presume that Mr. Lanzafame mentioned. None of this is that. And so it has nothing to do with what was just presented. We've been talking about, at your initiative, we've been talking a lot about veterans housing and so on. I think everybody here is on board with creating housing for veterans. I just don't know what this has to do with what is sounding like an awful lot like an attempt to circumvent a process. And, maybe it's just me, but I know nothing about any of this.
In the past, we've gone into exclusive negotiating agreements. Is this allowed, Mr.
It's within the parameters of the agenda item. It's certainly arguable that there is a pitch being made here, pretty clearly, but the parameters of the agenda item are to discuss the potential options involving this property, whether you go out to an RFP or not. I think his position is we don't go out to an RFP. So it's fairly arguable that it's within again, liberally construed within the four corners of the agenda item.
Right. His position is
doesn't mean it has to carry any weight with any members of the Housing Authority.
That we do an exclusive negotiation with his team, let's say.
That's the way I'm interpreting it.
But there's also no conclusion that we even do anything with this property. So
that's correct. That's absolutely correct.
I want to get this straight, Mr. Oliveris. You've been working on this for 8 months, long before we thought of doing an RFP or whatever. You saw a site owned by the city, like others have. And as Mr. Quintero said, we've entered into exclusive agreements without an RFP before. He and his team have spent 8 months getting to this point, and let's be fair, Mr. Oliver, you came in, you showed me a packet, you said you were talking to the other council people too, to show them what you had, the plans or whatever. And I thought it was quite interesting. Mr. Draymond apparently didn't know about it. I did, and I don't know how many of my colleagues actually talked with him. But I liked it from the standpoint of we've sat here talking about opening Section 8 to create veterans, or putting veterans into the list. If Mr. Oliveris is right about units being made available to veterans, and he can get it start construction by September next year, there probably wouldn't be a need to open Section 8 because we could designate X amount of units that we would want made available only for returning veterans in the project. That solves both sides of it. They'd have housing much quicker under a plan where he's put veterans into it than into Section 8 where you'd get on a list and who knows when you would get the housing. So I think it has value, but I don't think he did anything wrong. I've been one of the leading arguments of saying I want RFPs for exclusivity. The difference I see here is we've talked about the ability to help the veterans, and here's a project that could help the veterans sooner rather than later. So, I'm willing to think the other way because of the benefits we give to the veterans.
Mr. Starber?
Well, the basic question before you is one of whether you want to, and again, I don't, some of you seem to know far more about this project than I do. What I was told is that we could expect that Mr. Oliveris and the UCP would come in and request an exclusive. I don't know if our staff has seen the details of their proposal or not. I know I haven't. And frankly, if you have an interest in not going to RFP but want to consider this further, I'd recommend you direct it back to staff so we can review it in detail and bring you back an assessment of it.
Absolutely.
I guess I still stand beside our original recommendation, which is request proposals. I mean, granted, they may have been working on this for 8 months, but anybody could be working on this for longer than that because we've owned it longer than that if they were aware that we happen to own it.
So let's finish the presentation before we... So Cohen isn't here. The next speaker is Rachel Caravella. Caravella, followed by Maurice Ramirez.
Good afternoon, City Council members. My name is Rachel Caraviello. I'm the Vice President of Programs and Services at Alternative Living for the Aging, and we came today to introduce what we would bring to the management of a project, a mixed population project such as the one that's been proposed. ALA has a 30-year history of providing groundbreaking programs for low-income seniors in the form of co-housing and cooperative living. We've also operated and managed traditional senior housing. And we just very recently took on a large special needs project, Bonnie Bray Village Apartments in the city of Los Angeles. It's 92 units, and we entered into a partnership with Path Ventures. The partnership and the project itself is an experiment with mixed populations, bringing together low-income seniors and formerly homeless seniors. And it's expected to develop into a very rich and diverse community. As a provider of services in housing, we believe very strongly in the integration and the overlap of housing and services and their role in helping seniors age well in their community and age in place. And we believe that there's a good opportunity to do this with the partnership that's been proposed between UCP, ALA, AMCAL, and EFRN, Mr. Olivares. We're very confident a seniors and a veterans project will serve the growing and immediate need. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. Next is Maurice Ramirez.
Good afternoon. My name is Maurice Ramirez. I'm VP of Operations and Development for AMCAL. And if nothing else, I hope that this serves as a nice introduction for you guys in terms of our company, what we're doing, and our desire to work here in the city of Glendale. I have a quick PowerPoint presentation that we can just leaf through, and it's just really to show you more pictures and of our product. Really quickly,
If you want to use the mouse, you can.
Oh.
Advance.
MCAL has been in business for close to 33 years now. We're a vertically integrated company in that we're both the developer and the general contractor. I'll loop back into that a little later to show you, address some of the questions in terms of cost and value that brings. Since 1997, MCAL has focused on affordable housing development, both working on workforce housing in terms of first-time homebuyer programs and affordable housing. We have completed 34 developments across the state, as far north as Sacramento and in San Diego. We have about 3,100 units that are completed and operational. We have over $500 million of completed affordable housing developments since 1997. We have offices here in Agoura Hills, in Fresno, and Orange County. The developments picture there, the top. This one, it's a project we recently completed in Palmdale through an RFP process called Palo Verde. It is a senior development. It's the third development that we've done in Palmdale, all through RFPs, where we've been invited back. So we get really good references from them. This is a project in Simi Valley, also a senior development, and this is part of our Avenue 26 master plan, Camino al Oro, which is 108 units of senior housing. Do I click or?
Left click.
Just in the last, a recent tax credit experience, as you can see here, and I know that you have it as a handout as well. In 2009, we placed 5 developments, 274 units in service. Total tax credit allocation for those developments were almost $55 million. In 2010, we actually currently have 8 projects in construction, a couple of developments here in LA, a couple of developments in Fresno, right outside of Fresno, and one in San Diego. Our investors are top-tier investors, including Bank of America, JP Morgan, Citibank, Union Bank, Hudson. We're a top-tier developer for them in that we actually go direct placement investment with them. We don't use a syndicator. They provide both the construction permanent and they buy the tax credits, which makes the project a little bit easier. And we're always trying to figure out how to make it a little bit easier. This is a development called Los Vientos in San Diego. It won the Project of the Year award for San Diego, and this is our second development in Palmdale, also through an RFP called Cielo Azul. The county gave the land to the city, and the city RFP'd it, and we were successful in that process. Also a senior development, extremely nice senior development. Our flagship project in Los Angeles is a TOD, transit-oriented development, before there was actually transit-oriented development. This is the Metro Gold Line Gold Line on Avenue 26 Metro Rail stop here. It included 168 units of workforce housing. It had all sold before 2007, so we were fortunate to be in the market at the right time. This is the Camino Oro, which was previously pictured, 102 units of senior, 125 units of family, and 145 units of family at Flores del Valle with a child care center and a Head Start program. So this was really a pretty intensive master plan for transforming a formerly industrial zone into a residential area and tying the corridors between Broadway Avenue and Figueroa and Lincoln Heights. Just partnerships with cities. As you can see, we've been a repeat customer for several cities in terms of the product that they've liked. Most recently, we were awarded. Most recently, being not the last of all, but through Palmdale, through their recommendations, we're able to secure an RFP through the Rancho Palos Verdes. So we're doing an affordable housing development in Rancho Palos Verdes with very nice views, and I'll show you the rendering of those. But just to kind of keep on going through the slide, these are the projects that are currently in development. This is the Rancho Palos Verdes senior development that I mentioned. It's probably about 75% complete. In Westminster, we're developing this project. It's also about 75% complete. This is a development in LA, senior development. This is an intergenerational development in LA called Mosaic. 30% of the units are family, 70% of the units are seniors. It was really something that came out of the community outreach that we did. They wanted family and they wanted seniors. This is a development in Linwood, the top, also through being selected through the RFP process in Linwood. And just trying to blow through. MCAL has been developing, again, we're our own general contractor. We've been developing LEED certified buildings since 2007. Most recently, we're actually getting the certifications as well.
Okay, you have to.
I'll close with this, which is that our vertical integration, I think you'll find it's a really compelling factor to keep costs down. To answer some of the questions, our costs per unit are into $230,000 to $240,000 per unit for seniors. So we're well within the envelope that's has been identified. And I know my time's up, so I'll close with that. Thank you very much.
Okay. I have a question. I didn't catch the name of the lady that spoke. Who did you say you were with? What's the name of the...
Alternative Living for the Aging.
All right, that's the last card. Comments or questions, Mr. Dreeman?
Well, I'm going to have some comments and questions, but right now I just have one question about the PowerPoint. This particular one, they're not, the pages aren't numbered, so I can't tell you what page, but it's this page.
Yes.
This one in Los Angeles. Where is this? What is this?
It's in Jan Perry's district. It's 42nd and Main.
And what do you call that?
It's called Sunrise.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so the first question is whether to entertain the idea of a ENA. What does it stand for? Or
well, I would suggest you, if you're inclined to work directly with them, that you'd send your staff away to discuss both the specifics of the project and then at some point bring back to you an evaluation of that and the option of an exclusive negotiating agreement.
Exclusive negotiating agreement. So that's the first issue, whether we're interested in doing that or we want to go straight to a RFP.
I have a question that maybe even comes before that, and it's the issue raised by Mr. Milano. Isn't our money better spent buying an existing building at much less than the $350,000 to $400,000 per unit price that these are costing us? You can get some nice properties at that amount. So why are we going through this whole rigmarole if we can get decent properties and put them immediately on the market and serve the veterans, the seniors, families, whoever we're looking at. Why have we foreclosed that option?
Mr. Starberry.
Well, we haven't necessarily foreclosed it, but I know it seems rather counterintuitive that it would cost you as much as it does to both subsidize and construct, but there's rationale behind it, which has to do with the length of time something remains affordable, the services that are provided. It might be good for our economists to give you some insight into why not just go out there and buy units on the market as opposed to developing a new project. Why are new projects seemingly so expensive?
Well, before the economist speaks, one issue would be, number one, you're not creating new housing if you do that. Number two, most apartment buildings have existing tenants in them. So what do you do with tenants? You're moving a set of tenants out to bring in, quote, low income or, senior tenants. So those are my two seat of the pants, because I asked the first question when I first was on and saw the cost of the new units. I thought to myself, my God, we could. Anyway, those are my. Let's see what the economist has to say.
Now that you've laid yourself open.
Thank you, Mr. Quintero. My name is Tim Mulrennan from Tierra West Advisors. I've advised the Housing Authority on many of the affordable housing projects. Most of the motivation for housing authorities to create affordable housing comes from the Health and Safety Code, which generally encourages the redevelopment agencies to use its housing set-aside funds to increase and expand the supply of affordable housing, which means that the state really wants you to build new housing to increase inventory. You can buy existing units, rehab them, and make them affordable, put covenants on them. And as Mr. Quintero has pointed out, if they are occupied, you will often have relocation expenses, which can be quite significant. We also find that considering some of the leverage that we get with the tax credit process, as well as the HUD 202 programs that we're considering, we often get a very good leverage for the dollars that we're talking about. Much of the affordable housing that we've built in Glendale has been on the relatively expensive side if you look at it on a statewide average or a Southern California average, because our land is very expensive in Glendale. In this particular project, we're talking about a land cost per unit that ranges from around $75,000 per unit to over $100,000 per unit, depending upon how many units we decide to put there. In the particular case of this project, we're anticipating prevailing wage as part of the construction, which increases development costs by 20 to 30%. We also have typically utilized subterranean parking, 1 or 2 levels of subterranean parking, which increases our development costs substantially above what developers would build if they were building at grade. Hopefully I've addressed some of the concerns about why we don't rehab more units and why our costs may be on the high side. Be happy to answer any additional questions Housing Authority may have.
We might add into that depending on the nature of the project, like we've seen in some of our recent runs, there is a level of social services programming that also gets built into the development. So you have, in many cases, very low rents, so you're subsidizing those directly. In addition, there is, in especially rental projects, a social services component, a programming component that goes along with that, that's all built in to the units for what is a very low subsidized rent for a very long period of time.
That's correct.
That also drives up the cost, as opposed to going out and buying a unit that isn't going to have any programming attached to it, and then you also have maintenance issues that are associated. When you do a new development, especially rental, maintenance, management, social services programming is all built into those costs that you're paying for essentially up front for what is the entire period of the covenants.
The cost of the social programs it comes with the deal if you're applying for tax credits, and it's the cash flow to pay for that comes out of the rent. which leaves you less cash flow to pay debt service on, means a smaller loan, which means more money required from the redevelopment agency.
Okay, that's something I would like to look into further. I'm not convinced by any of those arguments, but now is not the time to hash those out.
Thank you.
Mr. Weaver.
I'm sorry that all my colleagues apparently didn't see what I had seen. It's not the first time in my career that developers with potential projects on certain properties have come in and asked what I thought about them, whatever. And I've always said, well, it looks nice, but it's still got to go through the system, find out, because I'm certainly not the expert. I've always done that courtesy. And my colleagues know that when we've had property and had developers come in, I've always insisted on a RFP, and every single time I've lost that I can recall. I don't care to change my tactics at this time, but we put a lot of emphasis lately on veterans, and they're leaving Iraq now for good, all of them, and coming back. I think there's a need. We don't know how much of a need. Mr. Oliveira is the first one I've ever heard come in and tell me he's planning on building units for veterans. How many? Who knows, because we don't know what the market is yet. But I'm resistant to wanting to open up Section 8 again and try to change with the mechanism in there simply to help the veterans that really need the help. This is a potential way to help the veterans in a sooner time frame than it would be through the Section 8 lists. At least that's what I believe, because the Section 8 list has been in existence, since 2001, and there's still thousands on the list. So I think it may have merit, but as I said, I'm not an expert in any of this. I'd like to at least hold off on whether we want to do an RFP, have Mr. Oliveira send his stuff in to the staff, let them evaluate and come back and say, okay, based on time frames and costs, the units being constructed, no underground parking, that's savings, millions of dollars right there. See if it makes sense to do it this way, the byproduct being helping the veterans. And I can't speak any further. Just him talking to me, and I hope, Mr. Oliveira, will make sure you talk to all the other members of the council too, as I thought you had done or were doing. So this way, if staff came back and says it has merit or it has deficiencies or whatever, we would know. Sounds like a good developer, but I don't know anything about it at this time. I'd have to have a comparison against the ones we've got and see how it flies. I'd like to direct staff to take it in. You guys all meet with staff and see where it goes.
Okay. Yeah, what's going on with
This says a motion directing to staff, and I like the idea as direction that this needs to be a senior project with veteran aspect to it. But we've had 10 projects that have been all family now, and the seniors definitely need some help. This needs to be, in my opinion, a senior project. I like the idea in our notes here of 53 units, which would still give not overcrowding and so forth. And your unit, you mentioned the fact about that figure too in what you had presented. But that's just my thoughts, that it needs to be senior with perhaps a veteran aspect to it.
I have a question for the staff. Do you know the breakdown overall, our housing figures, how many senior units we have and how many family units? Because I have a feeling we have a lot of senior units.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Housing Authority, I just had a conversation with Peter Zolvak about this, and I know he knows it better. Unfortunately, he's out ill. I recall Peter telling me that we did a lot of senior housing, and so we've done a lot of family, And now we're about half and half.
About even.
I don't have exact numbers, but I think we're about half and half of units developed.
Please, 700 plus
700.
units, I think.
So altogether, we have about 700 units.
Yeah, a little over 700, I think.
Ms. Friedman.
Well, I have a couple questions first. First, about the new versus old housing, rehab versus new. Doesn't the state mandate that we, in a redevelopment area, dedicate a certain amount of money to housing? And does that have to be new housing, or can cities just circumvent that by just buying up housing and saying we've provided low-income housing?
You, as a local jurisdiction, you have the option, the decision on how you want to spend that set-aside money. It needs to be to create affordable housing. You could buy existing units and rehab them. Oftentimes, you'll have small units that blow out a wall and you make a bigger family unit. In some of the cities that I've been in, we've done projects like that before. But it's really left to you as to how you want to develop that. What I would say in terms of a redevelopment component, one thing we didn't talk about, if you take Garfield Gardens, for instance, that is part of and the linchpin of a whole neighborhood revitalization in building something new and using that new development to build infrastructure or improve infrastructure in this case, and then parkland adjacent to. Oftentimes it's a catalyst to something more.
My other question is about senior housing in general. I thought I read somewhere that the new trend is to not build exclusively senior housing, that the thought now is that seniors like to live with children, and rather than building just exclusively senior-only housing. And can someone speak to that? Have those models of the multi-generational housing where some is set aside for seniors and some is set aside for families, how is that working?
I can't speak to it, Ms. Friedman.
Hey, Mr. Hagani, looks like he...
Good afternoon, members of the Housing Authority. I have been actually reading some articles about that particular experiment in planning journals recently. Many cities have embarked upon that. It's too early to see how extensive and how effective it is. We know, based on the articles I've read, the seniors enjoy it, but the families with children are often a little hesitant. So it's young. The whole idea started being implemented maybe early in this decade, this last decade that we're about to end. But the results are still sketchy. It's not clear.
I'd like to see if at some point maybe we can have a presentation about that, because if this is something that makes people happier and that makes people feel less warehoused or marginalized as they age, and also maybe gives those families the opportunity of having, lots of grandparents around, which is the way that I kind of read about it. I think it's something that we should explore before we make a decision about how we're going to dedicate or how we're going to do that mix. I mean, just anecdotally, I have a friend who had a 3-year-old who moved into, it wasn't a dedicated senior housing development, it just happened that everyone who lived there practically was, 70 and over. And for them, it was just the most positive thing for their family and for their children. And the seniors who were living there loved having these little kids around. So I would like to see maybe someone in staff do a little bit more research, maybe speak to some of those units, some of the management of those units or the cities that have done that, just to see how it's working out for them. Because just in theory, without knowing how it's working, it sounds very attractive to me. So,
aside from maybe the social benefits of it, one thing that we will have to recognize is the tax credits have specific categories for senior, for family, or for special needs. And I'm not sure that you can mix the two in
you
tax
can't
credits.
even, if you have certain units dedicated to one or the other, or buildings, if you have more than one building? Because with a site this size, you could easily have 5 buildings on that site, 4 buildings.
We worked on a project in Westminster which was intended to be an intergenerational project. They have ethnic groups down there where 2-3 generations live together. Ended up having to break it up into 2 different categories, with the families in one separate project, and then adjoining that project, it was a senior project, because it was financed with tax credits. And in tax credits, you have to check a box. You're either a family project or a senior project or a special needs project. They don't have a category yet for mixing them all together. You could mix them all together if you called it a family project, which throws everybody into the same pot, but then you would not have any authority, if you will, to keep a senior out or keep somebody out that did not have a senior with them.
But it sounds like with a lot this size, you could find a way to make more than one project on the site if we wanted to.
If you wanted to. And bear in mind, as it gets smaller, it gets to be more of a challenge to finance because your economies of scale start going away from you.
Okay.
Mr. Weaver,
just an add-on.
you have more?
It's okay.
I just want to say, following up, since I'm in my 70s, I love to have children around. I don't know what I would do without my granddaughter running around. She's a big part of my wife and my life now. And also,
Is that why you like us, Mr. Weaver?
oh, you're adults. And the only other thing, there's a lot of veterans coming back that are married and do have kids, and they're having tough times. So I don't know if we're saying family, that means you can have a mix within in a development. Is that what you're saying? So you could have seniors, you could have families, you could have vets, the whole mix.
That's right.
Call it family.
If you want to think of it that way, the family category is a catch-all category. So you could have families in there, you could have seniors, you could have...
So we could decide our own mix, but
within fair
reason.
housing law.
Yeah, not zeroing out any one category, but a mix.
Right.
Go ahead.
I could bring the numbers back, but Gardens of Garfield is probably a good example of that. That is a family project that we just did, but we built some one-bedrooms in that. So what we wound up with was a mix of families and seniors in that. So,
Mike, although we don't seem to be televising, introduce yourself.
oh, I apologize. Mike Forney, I'm your housing project manager.
So we're actually off the air at this point?
We seem to have lost transmission. We've left the TV zone so we can see if it comes back on again.
Can they hear us?
Staff's trying to find out what it is.
I don't believe they can, but we are being recorded, so this will be re-aired. Our crew down in GTV6 informs me that we're still being recorded. It's just
You don't know
right
if it's
now.
our issue or Charter's issue.
No, that static is an abstract interpretation of what goes on.
Rochard.
Oh,
Well, thank God Mr. Milano and Mohill are here to make sure that everything's on the up and up today, so we have it. All right. Any other comments, Mr. Draymond?
Yeah. I'm not sure to whom the argument is being directed about process and returning veterans and Section 8 and timing and good, bad, or indifferent. I haven't heard that argument being put forth here on the dais. However, as a matter of process, I also want to know, if I may, Chair, if we can, I'd like to know if anybody else other than Mr. Weaver, and perhaps you as the Chair, because you seem to know about this, had a slightest clue that what we were doing today was a pitch. Because typically this is not how it happens. And I want to make sure the public understands this is not at all how this typically happens. We don't come in and sit down with an agenda item in our packet that says that we're giving staff general direction on a general topic and then have a pitch unfold. It's like that old, what is it? Who's the comic? I don't get any respect. Who is that? Rodney Dangerfield talking about going to a council meeting and a prize fight breaks out, or a prize fight and a council meeting breaks out. In any case, my surprise, just so, again, I emphasize, has nothing to do with Mr. Olivares. I have a tremendous amount of respect for your skills. I don't know your associates here, but they seem to have a good background and all of that. But this is a total surprise to me that what I was coming in to discuss today was a pitch, and that I needed to be prepared to vote on a pitch, direction on a particular pitch. And that is the difference between how this is unfolded and how it usually unfolds. Usually, whether there's an RFP or not, at least in the time I've been here, can't speak to before that, whether there's an RFP or not an RFP, usually there is a discussion about land use that occurs, and there is some discussion of the pros and cons and the costs involved. And another thing, whether or not, if we do this project, what other projects we may or may not be able to do with remaining funds as well. All of those things usually go on as a discussion, and then some direction is given to staff. Staff then usually brings it back in a public setting. So I'm saying that as an elected official, if I had no idea there was a pitch being made today that I was supposed to vote on, how in the world would anybody in the public know that if they had an interest in speaking on this one way or the other, that they should be prepared to speak on it? It seems to me that just not a week ago, but maybe 2 weeks ago or so, in a redevelopment agency meeting, there was a whole lot of carrying on because BevMo was opening a site in Glendale, and it was purely about their signage and being able to sell bottled spirits, wine and so on, and a whole Donnybrook broke out about colleagues on this dais not knowing anything about it. And in particular, that was a topic that, though not everybody reads the Glendale News Press, the Glendale News Press had already written about. And we were hearing the same things. Well, we thought that briefings had gone on with the council, or the agency, I should say. I'm curious who on this dais has even heard about this before today.
Right. Well, let me say, I spoke to Mr. Olivares. I haven't had a briefing, or I don't know the details of what he's proposing or his team, but the issue for me is whether he obviously has done quite a bit of work. The issue for me is whether we want to set aside the RFP process at least for a couple of weeks until the staff has a chance to review it, and then they would come back to us, and then we would make a decision whether to move forward or move into a full RFP. It's certainly not the first time that the Housing Authority has not done a full RFP and worked with a specific developer and put together a project. So for me, it's about how quickly this organization could move into building something that works for the low-income people here in Glendale. Ms. Friedman?
Well, I was just going to answer Mr. Draymond's question, since you're taking a poll. I ran into Mr. Olivares last week? Or no, you sent me an email. I ran into him. He had sent me an email which I hadn't responded to yet, where he said something along the lines of, do you have a few minutes for me to talk to you about our project? And I said something like, what project is that? And his response was, well, the project on Sonora, of course. And I said something along the lines of, I didn't even know we owned property on Sonora. So I really hadn't heard anything. This was maybe a week and a half ago. He stopped into my office. He showed me briefly what he had. And I said, it looks fine, but I don't know anything about this project. This is the first I've heard. And that was sort of the end of it. So I don't know whether he was speaking to staff and thought that we had been kept up to date on whatever discussions they had been having, or whether they had just taken it upon themselves to find out that the city owned this piece of property and done this huge thing. I have no idea. The first I heard about this was last week. Even that this was a piece of property that was under consideration. When I got this packet was the first time I saw this address, and I didn't even realize that it was a city piece of property at that time. So I'm curious as to whether Mr. Olivares had conversations with staff about this, and for whatever reason they decided not to let us know. I really don't know.
Mr. Draymond, then Mr. Weaver.
Okay, well, two things. One is, it is, just to be clear, my question has nothing to do with whether this is the first, second, third, or 1,000th time that a project, we would consider moving forward with a project with an RFP or without an RFP. I think I made that abundantly clear. That is not what I'm saying. And one thing I'm not about to do is allow my words to be twisted into that as an argument. Absolutely not. That isn't the point. The point is, at least in the 3 years and 4 months or whatever it is I've been here, We have never sat down at this dais and discovered as the meeting unfolded that what we were hearing was a pitch for a project, whether affordable or any other kind. That's what I'm talking about. Not whether we decide to go forward with an RFP or not, or just require letters of intent, as we did with the senior project that was proposed in Montrose. Whatever. This is the first time I've ever sat down here having read what I thought was my packet very carefully, and there's nothing in here about a pitch being made. So I want to turn to staff, and maybe this answer is something you and I both, Ms. Friedman, should listen very carefully to, because I'd like to know from whoever the appropriate staff is, someone out there, this very nice gentleman who's sitting here listening to this very patiently, has been out there for 8 months, apparently, working on a project, a proposed project, on a piece of property that the city of Glendale owns, and apparently a large percentage of the housing authority has no idea that anything is in play at all. And it's not that I oppose it. I think I've made that clear. And I'm not going to vote against the project out of hand. But all I'm saying is I'd like to know how I'm supposed to vote in an educated manner and represent my constituency in the city when I don't even know that I'm going to hear a pitch today. I'm supposed to base it on 5 or so minutes, or a collective of maybe 8 minutes from some folks speaking at a microphone. But can someone from staff please tell me when it came to your attention that we were going to have a pitch, or that this... In other words, how could a project be working through the system for 8 months with no one up here knowing about it?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Housing Authority, I would say that I wouldn't characterize the project, at least as I know, working through the system. I know Mr. Olivares had met with Mr. Zovak last week. I have not seen the presentation that you got today. I knew generally what the idea was, but I was told there were no economics attached to it. I was aware that they were going to come and speak at oral communications. As Mr. Starbird had noted, your staff's position is what we had in our report, and our report was done 2 weeks prior, that we think you ought to do an RFP. I agree that Mr. Olivares does nice work, but that's where we are. I see I haven't answered your question.
No, you haven't. Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's someone who can.
Well, let me do this, because I frankly don't want to go any further down on the staff, because I'm totally clueless as to what discussions we may have had. At this point, I'd recommend you hold this matter over till next week. I'd like to look into it further and be able to give you the answer you want. I'd like the answer myself and be able to speak more intelligently to what indeed process they have been through with any, if any, with the staff. So I strongly recommend you take the matter off calendar. We'll bring it back to you once we've sorted all of that out. Because frankly, I don't know how to recommend you proceed from this point.
I would, and I know Mr. Weaver has had his hand, or was next in the queue, so to speak. But I just also would like to go on the record, Mr. Chair, and that is, as I said, I'm not trying to say I oppose the project, so don't walk away with that idea. I just want to clarify this process only from the standpoint that I walk in here and literally discover, maybe I'm dense, that could be regardless of whether I'm right or wrong in this, but I'm not prepared to vote on something that I'm just discovering as it unfolds here. And I get up and I walk over and I ask the city manager, I said, is this a pitch? It sounds like a pitch. And so, I mean, that's fine. I just want to know, I want to have time to know what I'm voting on before I vote. That's all. And as I say, there are other questions that we always ask when we entertain any project with regard to affordable housing and so on. There are a limited amount of funds. What does this mean for other projects that we might be looking at? Or does it mean that this would use up potential funds and no other projects, or we could do more? Or, those are the kinds of questions, some of the questions we ask. Well, I'm not prepared to ask or any of those things because I didn't know about this. So.
Okay, that's one. Go ahead, Mr.
I know we're beating a dead horse here, but I'm in here virtually every day. Mr. Oliveris called me last week and says, can I come in and show you about a project I and my team are working on? I said, sure. It's not the first time and won't be the last. I didn't know where or anything. It comes in and he says a site. Well, the city has owned that site for how many years now? It's been a number of years. Plans we've had there have not proceeded, whatever. Said he'd been working on it for 8 months, and then he sees that the RFP is coming up. Now, I didn't ask him, who on staff you're talking to, have you done this, done that? He had an idea. I said, are you going to talk to the other council people? He said, yes. He was going to meet with all of them. I said, okay. But I never thought I was coming here today to approve anything. I firmly believe that if he came with something, staff had to analyze it. If he's done his homework, it'll come by as a viable alternative. Do you want an RFP or this project? Either way could be good for the city. That's not here today. We can't vote on it. All we can direct staff is to look at it and come back to us again. And for me, I'd like to know, well, no, I don't want to know. I assumed staff had been contacted at different levels to ask about parking, and unless Mr. Oliveris did all the homework by himself. I mean, maybe, could we ask him?
Right, well, and that, my original comment is today the decision would be rather whether to go with the RFP or to have this development team talk to the staff. So what Mr. Starbird is suggesting is probably a good idea. We can just let this go for a week while...
Date certain?
While they... Right. I mean, obviously, there's other interests. The staff mentioned that there was someone else that had tied up some property. My question also in terms of an RFP is how long is that going to take? I mean, that's another criteria for me, Mr. Starver.
Mr. Najarian had his hand up first.
Mr. Najarian.
Well, it's my turn, and I do want to state for the record, Mr. Oliveris has done great design in the past. UCP has done great management of the facilities that they have on San Fernando Road. But once again, I'm not beating up staff. Staff, don't take this personally unless you're guilty. Once again, and taking into account I was absent this past week, but once again, there is what I feel, and I use the word ambush. Mr. Draymond was right. I did make quite a Donnybrook 2-3 weeks ago, and I'm not happy again the way this is brought before council because it's the wrong process. It's the wrong way. There are some very basic questions before we even get to the point of should we do an RFP, should we let staff review this thing individually. I want to sit down and hear some answers as to why we would even consider one of these scenarios where a $545,000 per unit cost is being put forth. And yes, I heard all that stuff, but I don't buy that. I mean, you can buy these units for $250,000. That leaves you $200,000 plus to amortize into costs. So that's something I need to sit down on. These costs, whether it's this piece of land itself or the proposed concepts, have just gone beyond reason at this point. And I think we need to sit down and talk about this. We don't need to hear a pitch on a proposal on a potential development. I'm not even ready to open it up to developers in general to see what they want to do. But I think we need to have a more in-depth explanation as to why we shouldn't go out and buy projects. Now, there are tons of buildings out there, new buildings, brand spanking new condos that have been built that are sitting there empty, that are going into foreclosure. Are we not also doing public good by taking those off the foreclosure rolls, by putting them to immediate use for the veterans, for the seniors, for the families, whoever they are? These are legitimate discussion points that we as a housing authority have to discuss before we commit to any sort of scenario, whether it's $545,000 at the high end and the low end has it at $335,000 per unit. That's at the 80-unit development. We should discuss this, and let's put the brakes on this. Let's this is wrong. What we're doing, the form of this discussion, and despite the city attorney's opinion that the discussion is well within the notice provisions of this agenda item, we're going way off it, and we need to just put the brakes on this. And if we're concerned about speed, well, certainly there is a method to get units to the veterans or seniors in a manner which is much quicker than going to an RFP and waiting for the 1.5 or 2 years of construction. So I vote for putting the brakes on this whole thing, not giving it to staff for staff to analyze, but to come back and convince me why going out in the open market and buying units that are brand spanking new or relatively new, that don't need extensive rehab, and whose purchase price are significantly low enough so planning and programming and counseling services can be incorporated in the entire deal. So that's where I'm at. So.
If there are brand spanking units, condominiums, and foreclosures, and meaning the entire building is in foreclosure and available to be purchased by the housing department, yeah, I'm there too. I don't have any problem with that. That's a good idea. If there's no tenants in a building that's brand new and built modern standards as condominiums are, then I'm all for that. I don't particularly know of any. If you know of any,
but we should. I mean, I guess that's the issue. Is that
that's worth investigating.
I have an idea where some of them are.
Right.
Because being in
they're sure to be accessible.
Market,
they're sure to be accessible and. All right. So, Mr. Starburn.
Well, for all those reasons, because there's now this whole new, more foundational question about how you approach the process of acquiring units. So I think we should take this matter off calendar.
Okay.
I think we need to come back and have the first discussion before we can have the second discussion. I will point out, though, we'll get more into this as we come back again, you have invested $6 million in a piece of property. So you don't have that $6 million necessarily to spend on new units. You may have $4 to $5 million over 2 fiscal years in new money. So that may very well limit the extent to which you can go out in the marketplace and buy units, because the land that you've invested in, you don't have as ready cash available. So that will be a factor.
1031 exchange with the banks.
But it's a fair question. And frankly, it's a foundational question we probably got into years ago, as I recall, about the whole question of how do you approach housing development in your community. It's a fair question. If the council wants, we can certainly come back and have that more foundational discussion before we move into the disposition of the Sonora and Fifth property. But in any case, I'd recommend you take this matter off calendar.
All right, we'll take the matter off calendar. I agree. But let's move forward. I mean, in the meantime, we have lots of folks that need assistance, and we're obviously in a horrible economic situation, so we can't just let this go on and on. I mean, this property, how long have we owned it? How many years have we, at least?
Long time.
Since
Poor
2000.
Boss Big Boy went out of business.
Yeah, exactly. So we've owned it for 5+ years, I guess. So let's do something.
Well, Mr. Chair, what kind of time are we talking about?
Well, I think we can come back and have the foundational discussion with you within the month of September easily. Not a lot of preparation for that. We can then turn right around and have the conversation about this property. So, I see this happening in the September timeframe.
And please work on something for the veterans sooner rather than later. They're leaving Iraq.
Well, if I can, you have all your other veterans programs you approved last week that the staff is still pursuing. So,
Housing.
No, that's what I'm saying. The housing projects you approved and gave us direction on last week, the staff is pursuing. With the exception of the Section 8 list discussion, all those other programs, VTRAP and everything else, is all moving forward.
And it's interesting how the veteran grapevine works. I've actually had 2 calls, one from a board member of a county veterans association or board commission, and then also from a younger guy who's, I believe he said he was a president of a veterans group in a community college, a local community college. So obviously whatever we did here, whether the press picked it up or they Googled, I don't know. But anyway, I've gotten 2 separate calls from that I haven't gotten a chance to speak to yet. But
Hope it works.
Mr. Draymond.
Mr. Quintero, I also just want to point out, because I don't want to give the public the. By the way, I've had feedback as well, not from the folks you're referring to, but just from veterans in the community who have been paying attention to this, who have stopped me to say, that they support particularly what we did last week. I think it's terrific. But I just also don't want to give the impression that even if we not only waived an RFP and approved this, even if we could approve this today, even if we approved it today, this wouldn't meet the deadline for returning vets from Iraq right now.
Of course not.
So, but having said that, that's all the more impetus to get moving as quickly as we can, and I am all for that as well. So,
All right, next, please.
Oh,
No objection.
Next is authority member and staff comments.
Authority member staff comments.
We adjourn?
We are adjourned.
Is there a
second.
second? Second? Thank you.
Thank you for your input.
Okay, we're going to roll right
But
ahead.
one moment, actually, we'll take a second
though
to
the-
set up. Madam Chair?
While we're setting up, we might note that our staff tells us we are still streaming on the